So I'm going to talk now about the development of large motor skills. Sometimes you might see the word gross motor. Gross motor and large motor skills are synonyms. They mean the same thing. There's no difference in what those terms mean. And they both relate to movements of the large muscles of the body. So the whole arm, the whole leg, the torso. So things like the development of posture, learning to walk and to move around. Uh, by the time we're toddlers, this includes pulling toys and climbing stairs and walking and running. One of the first large motor challenges that infants learn is to control that head. Remember, infants compared to adults have a proportionally really large head. And as newborns, they're almost kind of anchored down by this head because their neck isn't strong enough to support that head. And so they gain control over moving their head first and the ability to lift their head. And that's necessary before they can learn to sit. Sitting requires them to coordinate the head and neck muscles, but also the shoulder and back and hips. It requires a great deal of coordination and balancing those different muscle systems. And it's not uncommon that you'll see infants keeping one hand down as they sit, so that their hands and their legs are stretched out in sort of a tripod. Both they're sitting and as they're laying down, infants will begin to reach for things that they see in the environment. And those first reaches can be with the hands or the feet, but they're at first, very gross this is where that word gross motor comes from. Very gross overall movements of the whole arm. So almost like swatting at that mobile as they're laying down or kicking at it. So reaching and being able to make contact with something or picking up requires control of the muscles of the arm. It requires coordination of visual information to know where that object is in space. And it requires maintaining balance of the overall body. So when a child is sitting up and they reach for something, at first it's very common for them to sort of roll or fall over because of that difficulty in maintaining the balance as they're trying to combine that skill of reaching with that skill of setting. By 3 to 4 months of age, infants are able to make contacts with an object with their arms and with their legs and feet. Now, I need you to understand that everybody has a different course of moving from first lifting our head and first trying to sit up on through to walking. Many infants will crawl in some way, uh, but they're not going to follow one sequence. There isn't this one human series that goes from style one of crawling to style two. There are multiple paths, and they will do all sorts of things. Uh, that first crawl begins gradually. It's often a mistake. It's motor skills in a way, a lot of areas of development are driven by frustration. There's that thing that we want that's just out of reach. I'm reaching for it and I fall down and I push or scoop myself closer to it. Uh, it's all about achieving that goal of getting that thing. Usually, crawling is preceded by creeping or sort of belly crawling or bear crawling, like Mowgli and uh, the Jungle Book, where their legs are all the way down. You'll see infants and toddlers crawl in a variety of different ways. Sometimes they'll just scoot on their bottom. Sometimes they'll crawl backwards. It's doesn't really matter because what they're trying to do is get to that thing. Sometimes they'll roll to that thing. Um, as they are beginning to move around in the environment and they're beginning to crawl, whatever shape that is taking, They have to relearn those things that they learned from setting up about balance and position in space and being able to reach that object. Because now that they're mobile and standing in a different or crawling in a different position, what they learned about their body and their position and their balance and reaching something, they have to learn a new set of skills for that. This is also the place where we first see a fear of heights develop as infants are moving through. They have that locomotion to move through the environment. This doesn't mean that this is when they're developing depth perception. Remember, newborns could see depth, but what you will see is something like this. When an infant first begins crawling, that word there, visual cliff, if we put them on a glass table where they could see through the glass and under half of it, they can see the surface right under the glass, but under half of it, it looks like the surface drops down. When an infant first starts crawling, they'll crawl right across that glass without any fear of falling. But after they've crawled for a couple of weeks, they don't want to go across that drop off anymore. And they could have their parents over there saying, "Come here, come here, come here," and they will not go across that glass. So they have to learn that through experience that this depth matters. That this they can't just crawl across space. That they can't crawl across that big gap. At some point, all infants that are typically developing will learn to walk. And that's going to follow a different schedule for each infant. There's no magic time that says now's the day. And there's no magic point in the sequence that when you get to stage X of crawling, you're going to transition into walking. Most usually, infants start with cruising. They walk while holding on to the furniture or things in their environment. As they begin walking, uh, their feet, the feet of toddlers are very flat. They where we as adults have an arch in our feet, they have sort of a fatty pad there. So they're very flat. They're very top heavy. Their center of gravity is really high because of that big head, and so their first steps they'll keep their feet spaced really far apart with small steps, toddling back and forth like a kind of a Frankenstein's monster toddle, and this is why we call that group toddlers. And changes. They have to learn everything they learned about reaching and position in space and all those things while they were crawling. It's a whole new world when you're standing up, and they have to relearn all of those things. So it's common that they fall. They have to adjust to new terrain. It's really common that a baby who's learned to walk holding on to things inside, and they're starting to walk on their own, and you put them down on the ground outside and they immediately hit the ground because this grass or this slope is a whole new challenge, and so they have to adjust and relearn all of those things, even though they may have been crawling on that grass before. It's a whole new thing to learn now that they're walking. Again, there's no one set course, there's no one set timetable uh, in the development of those large motor skills. There are individual differences that come from things like our genes, our family environments, the opportunities to practice, and a variety of just idiosyncratic factors that can happen. Um, just that child's desire to get that thing, that toy that's just out of their reach. There are also cultural practices that can impact how motor skills develop. And there's one example here on this slide. In modern day China, it's considered dirty for infants to be on the ground. And so infants are discouraged from crawling and they're not put on the ground. And Chinese infants crawl and walk on average at later ages than infants in the United States. On the other hand, in Jamaica, if you ask Jamaican mothers at what age should a child start walking, they'll say, "Oh, about 10 months." If you ask mothers in America, They'll say, oh, about 12 months. And sure enough, infants in Jamaica start walking a little earlier on average than infants in the United States. And if you watch what's going on, the mothers in Jamaica are massaging those legs and working those legs and really practice them in walking because they expect them to go do that. Uh, so that cultural practice is associated with walking a little earlier, whereas in China it's associated with walking a little later. But there are still within all those cultures, Jamaica, United States, China, individual differences. Some kids walk earlier than others, and some walk later in any of those cultures. And some children in the United States will walk earlier than some children in Jamaica, and some children in China will walk earlier than some children in the United States. And what's even more important is all of those children are within a range of what's developmentally appropriate. So even though the Jamaican children, infants are walking a little sooner on average, and the Chinese a little later, they're all within the developmental typical range of anywhere from 10 to 14 months of walking. It's just where those averages. So even though culture has an impact, it's it can't be that extreme. And all of those differences are within the typical ranges. So on a chart like this of large motor skills, you'll see like this one is stand with support. And there's a range there in purple, anywhere from 5 months of age up to almost 10 months of age. So you may first see that behavior appear anywhere within that range. Uh, what's important here is you see some of the typical timing and some of the order. So lifting a head usually happens within the first month of life. Some children will do it sooner than others. Pushing their chest up, sort of in a mermaid kind of pose, can be anywhere from 2 to 4 months. Rolling over is usually from 2 to 4 months, and on up to uh, pulling themselves up to stand, walking using furniture, standing alone, and walking alone anywhere from about 10 to 14 months. And that's got about 11 to 14 months. So this just lists some of those milestones. Uh, I guess the key word there is walking alone easily, anywhere from 11 to 14 months. So as we get into the toddler years, 13 to 18 months, we're typically walking very stiffly, very flat-footed, able to pull a toy along on a string, uh, using, let me raise that up for you. Oh, I can't. Riding on four-wheeled toys, using the handrails to climb up the steps. By 18 to 24 months, walking quickly, running stiffly for short distances. Uh, we can balance and squat down while playing on the floor, and they'll lift themselves right up from that squat. Uh, they can walk backwards, stand in a single place and kick a ball, and stand and throw a ball and jump in place. By the preschool years, we see increasing complexity in the skills that are using the large muscles, things like climbing and riding tricycles. Uh, Large motor skills are what determine the overall activity level of a child. And that activity level increases as children grow older throughout childhood. Boys tend to be more active and therefore more engaged in large motor than girls, although that's an average kind of thing, and some girls are more active than many boys. That may be a genetic influence, uh, or it may be cultural. It's difficult to say. So 3-year-olds, we will see them doing things like hopping, jumping, running, and they'll become more adventurous as they go through the preschool years. Now, if you we could answer this question in two different ways about when is the highest activity level. You'll remember last week we talked about nutrition, and because elementary school age children's bodies are bigger and they're growing, that's the time in our life when we use the most calories. So if we thought about activity level as the time that we're burning the most calories, it would be the elementary school years. If we thought about activity level as large motor movement and the degree to which they're in constant movement, it would be the preschool years. 3 years old is the time when we're even when they're asleep. 3-year-olds are often fidgety and moving around. They're almost in constant motion. Um, Young children, preschoolers need vigorous, large motor daily exercises where there can be freedom of outdoors, indoors. That daily uh, large motor play is so important in developing their physical skills as well as their coordination between vision and movement. We talk a little bit about going up and down stairs. So this is a large motor skill uh, that demonstrates a couple of terms here that you should know about motor skills. And one of them is mastered. And a motor skill is mastered when you do it automatically. You don't have to concentrate or think about doing it. So those 2-year-olds, remember that they're very top heavy. They can go upstairs using what's called mark time climbing. That means they'll put one foot on a step, and then bring the other foot to the same step, and then put one foot on the next step and bring the other foot to that step. And they go one step at a time with both feet on that step before going to the next. Some children will always start from the same foot. They're already showing a preference for right or left side of their body, uh, to the point where someone will line themselves up before going up that stair. Others may vacillate between leading with their left or right foot. Uh, because of that center of gravity, it's easier for us to go upstairs than it is to go downstairs. So the 2-year-olds are going to use mark time climbing, typically both going up and down, but they may require assistance in both directions, but more often going down. By 3, most children can go up the stairs with alternating steps. They'll put one foot on a step and then the other foot on the next step. Without an adult helping them. But it's more difficult going down the stairs, and so most 3-year-olds will still use mark time climbing going down the stairs. They're also better at climbing up things on the playground, so they can climb to the top of a jungle gym or a play structure or a tree, and it's very common to have difficulty coming down and to call for help when they because they get stuck up there. About 50% of 3-year-olds are rated as proficient climbers on those kinds of structures. 4-year-olds are going down the stairs alternating feet as long as they have a handrail, but they may still go to mark time stair climbing going down if there's no support. So like one of those concrete stair sets that have no support on either side. Going up the stairs is a mastered skill for most 4-year-olds. They're not thinking about that. For 5-year-olds, they go down long stairways, alternating feet, unaided, but it's still not considered mastered because they still may need to concentrate on the going down. So in this chart, and I'm not going to go through every word on this chart with you, because you could look back at this later, but it shows for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds what running looks like. And so you're going to see longer strides, faster speed, ability to turn quickly, sort of stop on a dime. Same for galloping. Same for galloping, where we don't really see this with 3-year-olds, but by 5, over 3/4 of children can gallop. Hopping, um, 3-year-olds can hop about 10 times on if they're jumping with both feet, about 1 to 3 times on one foot. By the time they're 5, almost 80% are rated as proficient in hopping and can hop 10 or more times on each foot. What also increases here is the younger children are very stiff with their body. By the time they're 5, their bodies kind of spring. They're the up and the down motion with their ankles, knees, and bending. Here is climbing. We've looked at that a little bit already. This is balance. Younger children uh, with bigger, wider balance beams, these can become more narrow as they get older. Skipping, which is difficult and kind of shuffling along for 3-year-olds, about 72% of 5-year-olds are rated as proficient in there. They can change from one side to the other as they skip, uh, and use mostly the balls of their feet. Jumping, um, we go from more of a stiff overall body movement to uh, a more using our arms, swinging them to take off, and cushioning ourselves as we land. And I wanted to show you this because this is another way that you'll sometimes see large motor skills described, the development of large motor skills described. This isn't based on ages, it's based on stages. So these are the stages of catching a ball. The first stage is called delayed arm reaction. The young child's arms are straight in front of them. When there's ball contact, they scoop that in towards their chest. Their feet are planted and very stationary. In stage two, they'll wait for the ball and then kind of grab it and hug it to their chest. Their feet are stationary, or they may take one step forward towards the ball. Stage three, they scoop under the ball as it comes to them and may step towards it. Stage four, they're only using their hands to catch the ball, but their feet are stationary or limited to one step. And in stage five, they're able to move through space and use only their hands to catch and put those together. There's a little note there at the bottom that says you don't wake up one morning and you've graduated from stage two to stage three just like that. There are periods where there's a blend of performance where things are changing and improving, and you can see a child with some characteristics of the previous stage and the next stage.